Hello and welcome to the CUFI UK podcast. My name is Alex and I'm not joined here by Alistair because he's away this week. This week I'm going to be talking about the UK's moral failure regarding Israel, its condemnations of Israel, its breaking of the trade agreements that was taking place between Israel and the UK, and why the UK government itself is the one damaging the Israel-UK relationship. So we're going to be defending Israel against our own government because they have an unbiblical and frankly a morally bankrupt attitude towards Israel, and that needs to be corrected. So as you can see today, I am solo. Alistair is away, but hopefully I'll be able to keep your attention and give you as much information as I can. So let's get on with it. There's a lot of things that have happened over the last few weeks that we need to discuss, but let's start with something a bit lighter, which is the Eurovision Song Contest. Now, if you don't know, Eurovision is a song contest where different countries from around Europe come together. They all have one act and there's voting, so each country votes to see who they prefer out of the song contest, and there's one overall winner. Well, amazingly, Israel came second in this year's competition. Yuval Raphael, she's actually an October 7th survivor, and there is obviously controversy whenever Israel's involved in any international event, and there was controversy this time as well, where there was calls to expel her from countries like Spain and Ireland, but she wasn't expelled and actually came second. And the surprising thing is, in the public vote, she actually came first, which means that she received more votes from the public than any other country in the competition, which I think goes to show that there is a silent majority out there who are supporting Israel. Now, as you can imagine, those who don't like Israel have come up with a lot of conspiracies saying that obviously it's the Jews that control the world and therefore they're manipulating this vote, which is absolute nonsense. And we'll get into that in a bit. But I just want to explain a bit about Yuval Raphael, because she actually is a survivor of the October 7th terror attacks. She had to hide under the bodies of her friends for 8 hours while terrorists were looking for survivors to kill. And so she was in a bomb shelter. The bomb shelter was attacked. Grenades were thrown into it. People were killed. And, it's an absolute horrific thing. She is a survivor of that attack. She should be honoured for that. But unfortunately, the world doesn't see it that way. They see not the whole world, but obviously a lot of anti-Israel people do not have the ability to remove human beings from Israel. They just see Israel as this evil entity, and therefore anyone representing Israel is evil. And so you have protesters against her. There was so many incidents of just anti-Israel attacks against her, anti-Semitic attacks against her, and that's why we're raising it, really, because even though in the grand scheme of things Eurovision isn't such an important thing, really, it was actually highlighting the anti-Semitic hatred that there is towards Israel. So there were protesters who were protesting outside of the show when she was driving along, when they had a Eurovision sort of street parade showing the different contestants. There were people doing sort of throat-slitting gestures towards her, saying they wanted to kill her. There was TV channels were against her. For example, in Spain, they put up a sort of warning to viewers saying about human rights issues and so forth. And there's this big campaign against her and against Israel, bearing in mind that she herself is a survivor of the October 7th attacks. And, she is a fighter. She's a warrior. She's standing up on the world stage, receiving all this hatred. And in my mind, it's the same anti-Semitic spirit that was there on October 7th trying to kill her. The same attitudes are there in the person doing this throat-slitting gesture and so forth. Like, that's the same hatred. It's coming out in a different way, but it is the same hatred. And they're supporting an evil agenda, which is Hamas and radical Islam. It's, everything against Israel. And unfortunately, there even with some controversy with our own TV channel with the BBC, Graham Norton, he didn't give any of her backstory in this instance. He just said that Israel's entry to it was controversial, which is a bit sad, really. So Yuval actually had to practice to receive boos. So she practiced in front of an audience with boos. During the event, there was actually boos ringing out. There was also cheers as well. Her boyfriend was in the audience screaming as loud as he could to give her some support. But while she was performing, there was actually 2 attempts to storm the stage. And one of them was trying to throw paint on the stage, and he was arrested. And it's one of those things where she was having to get ready for this intimidation, get ready for this abuse. And for me, it just, I can't really comprehend the mind that would hate someone who has suffered so much. Her only crime is being born in Israel, wanting to live, wanting to sing, and that's the only thing they have against her, really. And yeah, it just, to me, is anti-Semitic, and it's horrible. But anyway, some of the backlash from that, bearing in mind Israel received the most votes out of any country. In the UK, for example, we gave 12 points to Israel. Some of the most anti-Semitic governments in the world, their people actually voted in favour of Israel. So, for example, Spain and Ireland were 2 countries that called for her removal, for Israel's removal, and actually the publics of those countries gave them lots of points. So it shows that even though the governments may be anti-Semitic, may be anti-Israel, the people themselves are not. Looking at the aftermath of this, there were calls from different groups saying there must be some rigging, it must be fixed, there must be people doing multiple voting, or Israel's paid for these votes, or Israel's using bots to vote, etc., etc. Well, basically, it's a complete lie. It's nonsense. As you'd expect from the BBC, as a headline here, it says Israel's Eurovision results prompt questioning over voting. Well, actually, what they should have gone with was the last few lines of their article, which clearly say that this is from the director, Martin Green, who oversees the voting at Eurovision. He said, an independent compliance monitor reviews both jury and public vote data to ensure we have a valid result. Our voting partner Once has confirmed, that's the name of the company, Once, has confirmed that a valid vote was recorded in all countries participating in this year's grand final and in the rest of the world. So basically, there was no rigged voting. It should also be pointed out that organizations like us, CUFI, Christians United for Israel, we are big supporters of Israel, and we have not been approached in any way, shape or form by Israel to promote Eurovision. Because there's this kind of crazy conspiracy going on, because Israel, on their social media platforms, especially with their embassies in different countries, they've actually put out, vote for Yuval. And people are saying that, this was a big marketing campaign that Israel did. Well, actually, if you look at those posts, the most I saw one of the reach was about 50,000, which isn't a huge 50,000 reach, not 50,000 likes, which isn't actually very big. If they really were putting together a big marketing campaign, paying money and things, you would expect the embassies to approach organizations like CUFI and ask us to promote it as well. But actually, we never received any information. In fact, the first mention of Eurovision that we did was in the prayer last week, where we basically said, pray for the safety of Israel's participants in Eurovision, because we could just see the anti-Semitic hatred that there was. And the first thing we put on social media for it was showing the tribute that was made for the Bibas family. Because when Yuval was performing, she had this black dress on with long black sleeves, and she put her arms up during her song, and it made the symbol of the Batman logo, which actually was a complete coincidence, it turns out. She didn't do that on purpose, but it looked like the Batman logo. And if anyone knows, the Batman logo is now being associated in Israel with the Bibas family. The Bibas family were the youngest hostages to be taken into Gaza, and they were killed in captivity by Hamas. And people saw it as a tribute to that. The Bibas family even put out a statement thanking her for it. But in reality, It was actually just a happy coincidence. It was accidental, but a nice way of honoring Israel. So obviously some people were looking at Israel's performance, looking for the good in Israel's performance, but unfortunately there's a lot of people around the world who were looking for the bad, especially online with the activism. A lot of people probably not caring at all about Eurovision or the competition, but just wanting to hate Israel for it. So, yeah, I thought I'd start with Eurovision just to sort of get that out there. But the main reason I'm saying it is not because Israel was involved in a competition, not to sing Israel's praises, but to show that there is anti-Semitism which follows Israel and follows the Jewish people, follows Israelis wherever they go. And at the same time, there is people who love and support the Jewish people, love Israel. And by the way, a lot of people voting, bearing in mind, Eurovision attracts around 150 to 200 million people watching. There are millions of people voting, and they could be voting for any reason. They could have liked her song, they could have liked her dress, they could have liked any aspect of it, or they could have been pro-Israel activists and they were, supporting her there. There's so many different elements to it. It wasn't just one thing that would be causing people to vote for her. So it doesn't mean, we can look into these numbers as much as we want, but actually the end result was Israel seems to be liked by the public more than what the media would tell you anyway. So I thought I'd start with something light before we get into more serious topics. So next we're going to talk about the United Kingdom and their response to Israel's latest offensive in Gaza. So over the weekend, Israel, the IDF, launched Operation Gideon's Chariot, which aims to deliver a final blow against Hamas. And it's been carrying out extensive strikes in Gaza, and it's actually taken out some key Hamas leaders there. And so Israel is, conducting a heavy bombardment upon Hamas positions. It's trying to control the north, where that's where Hamas basically uses the area to stage attacks against Israel, especially with rocket fire. Fortunately, that's not happened for a while now. There are occasionally rockets that get fired into Israel, but Israel has good control over the north at the moment. But obviously there is a need for Israel to take out Hamas, to control areas of Gaza so that Hamas cannot operate within them. And this requires them to move forces in. It requires them to go to battle against Hamas forces. And it's something which is messy. It's something which is needed to be done because Israel is trying to exert strong pressure onto Hamas to try and force them to release the hostages. We need to remember that this war would not be happening if, first of all, Hamas didn't invade Israel on October 7th, but second of all, if Hamas just gave back the hostages, which it took on October 7th. So there are still 58 hostages that remain in Gaza. And Hamas needs to let them go. There's a big movement saying bring them home, which obviously puts an emphasis onto Israel to bring them home. But the reality is we need to be saying to Hamas, let them go, let God's people go. And unfortunately, the nations of the world are seeing Israel's actions through a lens of false narratives, through a lens of biased media, through a lens of activism, through a lens of anti-Israel bias, and they're making bad decisions. So earlier this week, Britain, France, and Canada all released a statement they condemned Israel, and they actually, as Colonel Richard Kemp said here, they, is a critical moment, and with a masterstroke of ill judgment, Britain, France, and Canada reached into muddy waters that they do not understand and hold out a hand to pull Hamas back to the surface. So basically, Israel is damaging Hamas, doing, a good effort to try and destroy them and to weaken their hold on Gaza. And Israel's allies, or so-called allies, have come in and actually given Hamas a lifeline, right? And so I want to just sort of clarify some of that here, because this is something where it's sort of hard to put into words exactly how damaging the attacks against Israel in political senses are to the war effort in Gaza. So if we go back to the Biden administration was quite objectional to the way Israel was conducting its war in Gaza, bearing in mind that Israel, the IDF, have killed less civilians than any other military force in terms of the ratio of civilians to combatant deaths. Even Hamas now admits that around 70% of the people who have been killed in Gaza are males of military combatant age. So, even they admit that the majority of those killed are combatants, right? But the narrative is Israel's killing women and children, which is a lie. And so Antony Blinken, at the end of Biden's administration, at the end of his first term, he actually acknowledged that his strong criticism of Israel and the criticism of America and the West actually showing a rift between Israel and the West pushed Hamas further away from negotiations. And just this week, Adam Boehler, who is President Trump's US Special Envoy for Hostage Response, said that Israel's recent military actions in Gaza were moving Hamas closer to a hostage deal. So he said, quote him, Boehler said, "We think we're closer than we ever were. And part of that is because of the movement of the IDF and Israel on the ground. It strengthens our hand." So I just want to put two and two together here. Blinken, a US advisor who made mistakes when he was dealing with the Israel-Gaza conflict, he said actually the opposition to Israel on the international stage was pushing Hamas further away from a hostage negotiation, further away from a ceasefire. And Adam Boehler, who's the current person dealing with the hostages, he says Israel's actions are pushing Hamas closer to a deal. So if you look at that, everything that I'm about to go into now about what the UK has done particularly, but the UK, France and Canada, everything they're doing is helping Hamas. As Richard Kemp said, they have put their hands into the water and given Hamas a helping hand out of troubled waters. And this is absolutely abhorrent. It's something we are completely against here in the UK. Obviously we have compassion for Palestinians, compassion for those living in Gaza. But when it comes to Hamas and dealing with Hamas, Israel has to have a strong hand against them. Otherwise, Hamas is empowered and Israel is weakened. So what has the UK done? Well, they released that statement with France and Canada, but they've also come out strongly yesterday. The Foreign Minister, David Lammy, came out and said, basically he accused Israel of extremism and monstrous intent. So he says, we must call this what it is. It is extremism, it is dangerous, it is repellent, it is monstrous, and I condemn it in the strongest possible terms. And he was actually talking about some Israeli officials who have spoken about moving populations within Gaza from the north to the south and that sort of thing. He announced a suspension of trade talks and diplomatic measures. So he said, today I am announcing that we have suspended negotiations with this Israeli government. And I want to note there, this Israeli government, not the Israeli government, this Israeli government on a new trade agreement, and we will be reviewing cooperation with them under the 2030 bilateral roadmap. He said he critiqued the humanitarian response. So Prime Minister Netanyahu said that they're going to control what goes into the strip, letting only a minimal amount of food in. And, well, he didn't say minimal, that's what David Lammy said. But it would be just enough to provide so that they wouldn't starve, basically. And obviously Lammy has a problem with that because he believes that there should be an unmitigated amount of aid going into Gaza, which actually goes against the rules of law, against international conventions, and I'll get on to that in a bit. Lammy labelled Israel's military operations as morally unjustifiable, wholly disproportionate, and utterly counterproductive. Well, as I mentioned before, the US actually disagrees with Lammy on this because they think it is productive because it is pushing Hamas closer to a ceasefire. And morally unjustifiable, how is defeating Hamas, a radical Islamist terrorist group, how is it unjustifiable to go against them? I mean, Another thing that Lamy's done is he's sanctioned West Bank settlers. So the UK government imposed sanctions on individuals and entities associated with the settler movement in the West Bank, citing involvement in violence against Palestinians. And he also warned Israel about international isolation. And so he said that the actions of the Israeli government are isolating the country from its allies. So this is what he said. He said, regrettably, despite our efforts, this Israeli government's egregious actions and rhetoric have continued. They are isolating Israel from its friends and partners around the world, undermining the interests of the Israeli people and damaging the image of the state of Israel in the eyes of the world. And listen to Lamy's rhetoric there. I mean, he's used words like monstrous. He said it goes against British values. That was another thing he said. He said it's, undermining the interests of the Israeli people, damaging the image of Israel, and so forth. When he said it with such venom, right? He's speaking very passionately against Israel here. And I think we have to be aware that David Lammy, just as Keir Starmer was, they were people who endorsed Jeremy Corbyn. They are people who have attended Labour events where you don't see a British flag, you don't see an Israeli flag, you only see a Palestinian flag. They are very much anti-Israel in their viewpoint, but they will always give these sort of they'll always say things like, we care about the hostages, we want to see a two-state solution, we want to see peace and all these things, but actually everything they say and do really is working against peace, working against long-term stability in the region. It's working against Israel. And so they can say things because they're very clever and they can say nice words that make it sound like they are pro-Israel, but actually their actions speak far louder than their words. So obviously there's a lot of things Lammy said. He actually gave, a good sort of 20-minute speech in Parliament about it. So obviously I'm not going to say word for word everything that he said. But I want you to listen to the rhetoric he uses. He says things like, this Israeli government, the Netanyahu government. He's trying to separate out the democratically elected government of Israel with the Israeli people. And this is the sort of thing that, for example, Prime Minister Netanyahu does when he's talking to a dictatorship. So when he's speaking to Iran, for example, Iran is a dictatorship. Khomeini is the Ayatollah Khomeini is the supreme leader of Iran. He dictates everything that goes on in Iran. They have sham elections where they elect a president, but it is based on people who are hand-picked by Khomeini, and then the people can basically choose which of those is going to be the prime minister, or the president, I should say. But ultimately, Khomeini is the boss. He is the person that they bow down to. So therefore, it is a dictatorship. And we know from statistics that the people of Iran are very much against their government. In fact, when we look at the anti-Semitic charts of the Middle East, Iran is the least anti-Semitic country in the Middle East because their people are so at odds with the government that is representing them on the world stage. And yet Iran is the biggest threat to Israel. They're the ones who are trying to get a nuclear weapon. Khomeini believes that if he can bring about the destruction of Israel, that he'll bring about a new Islamic age which will encompass the entire world. They have a religious motive, an ideological motive to destroy Israel, and they believe it is written in the scriptures, the Quranic verses, that's what they have to do. And so the reason why Netanyahu speaks differently to the people of Iran and the regime of Iran is because one of them is the enemy of Israel, one of them is not, right? And so the Iranian people are the friends of Israel, the Iranian regime is not. For David Lammy to say this about the Israeli government, bearing in mind Israel and the UK share probably the closest relationship when it comes to our intelligence sharing between MI5, MI6, Mossad, that sort of thing. Israel helps the UK in many, many ways. And for David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, to use this sort of rhetoric when speaking about the government, and he literally, during his speech, he directly references the people of Israel. He says, I have a message to the people of Israel. He says, I say to you now, the people of Israel, I want a strong friendship with you based on shared values with flourishing ties between our peoples and society. We are unwavering in our commitment to your security and to your future, to countering the very real threat from Iran, the scourge of terrorism and the evils of anti-Semitism. But the conduct of the war in Gaza is damaging our relationship with your government. And as the Prime Minister has said, if Israel pursued this military offensive as it has threatened, failing to ensure the unhindered provision of aid, we will take further action in response. So this is what I'm trying to say here. Lamy is directly speaking to the people of Israel. And by the way, Israelis, for the most part, do actually support the war effort in Gaza because they see the evil of Hamas. They know the threat. They've been living there. They live in the most dangerous part of the world, and Israel has to fight against multiple enemies that are trying to wipe the Jewish people off the face of the earth. So it is absolutely abhorrent that Lamy has that is speaking this way. It shows a rift between the UK and Israel in terms of our governments, which I think is something, we have to be praying about. But I just want to highlight that sort of, the fact that he is trying to lecture the Israeli government. He's trying to act as if, he even says it here that he, that the UK is on their side in countering the very real threat of Iran, committed to their security and so forth, as if Israel isn't, as if the Israeli government isn't trying to do that. And I just find it absolutely absurd and just, frankly insulting that someone like Lamy, who in my opinion is an activist for a cause, he's not got the credentials of being able to understand these complex issues, in my opinion. He is just an activist, and he's trying to act like he knows better than everyone in Israel who has lived for 77 years fighting for their survival in a region which is like the most hostile place on earth. It just shows how high-minded people like David Lamy are, and Keir Starmer and so forth, where they are talking down to Israel and to Israelis, telling them what to do. And I think as well, it goes into, if we look at UK politics and things, when we see how strongly they word statements, again, for example, the way in which radical Islam here in the UK is an issue which is rising, and yet our government seems to be very weak against that, but very strong against people who oppose radical Islam. And I think it just shows there is like a lack of moral clarity there, a lack of strength, actually. I think it is very weak leadership from people like David Lamy, from Keir Starmer, where they are attacking our friends and not attacking our enemies. And Israel has shared enemies with the UK. Hamas is a shared enemy of the UK. Radical Islam is a shared enemy of British values and of the Western world. When Yuval Raphael was at Eurovision, they weren't just burning flags of Israel, they were burning flags of America and Israel. Why? Because Israel and the West are an enemy to the radical Islamist mindset. And so we as Britain, we need to understand, and our government needs to understand, that Israel is standing and fighting for us on the front lines against radical Islam. And I just think it just shows this, this lack of clarity that there is there. So one of the things I want to go back to is a lot of the reasoning behind Israel's the UK's actions recently is because what they're seeing is headlines of, trauma in Gaza, of strikes in Gaza, people being injured, and they're seeing, Israel hasn't allowed aid into Gaza for 11 weeks, and there's a famine there, and everyone's saying, all these different things about it. And that is causing this sort of like massive amount of pressure on Western governments to, force their hand into taking action against Israel. And all of it is based upon lies and propaganda. And I just want to try and dispel some of these lies because, the UK is taking action based on false reporting in the BBC. The UK is taking action because they're hearing people tell them things which aren't true. And one of those lies, you may have heard about this, about 14,000 babies who will die in the next 48 hours. it was an absolute lie, a fabrication. So what happened was, so Tom Fletcher, who is the UN's humanitarian chief, so he is the head of humanitarian aid in the UN, in the world, and he was on the BBC being interviewed, and he said, and I quote, he said, 14,000 babies in the next 48 hours will die unless we can reach them. And just think about that. 14,000 babies will die in Gaza in the next 48 hours. That, anyone listening to that will be shocked and horrified. The reality is, it is not true. So he was questioned about this. When the presenter asked back, 14,000 babies, that's an extraordinary figure. He said, it's chilling, it's utterly chilling. And he was getting emotional with this. He was saying, but this is what we do. We've got to keep going. It will be frustrating. We'll be impeded. We run huge risks. But I don't see a better solution than getting baby food to those mums who at the moment cannot feed their own kids. And he was saying it like, we may be hit by Israel. We may be stopped by Hamas, all this stuff, but we're going to do mission. It's very much like this. He's the savior kind of mentality. And he's obviously pulling at heartstrings, being emotional, but ultimately he was speaking lies. And this is a complete blood libel, an anti-Semitic blood libel against Israel. The BBC later asked the UN for the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs to clarify that this statement was correct. And it turns out it was a complete fallacy. There are 14,000 children in Gaza who, in the next year, may suffer from severe acute malnutrition, which is very different than in the next 2 days, 14,000 babies will be dead, right? So let's get this correct and let's break it down a little bit. So 14,000 babies suffering from nutrition, not even dying, but they may have malnutrition, acute malnutrition, which is severe and is wrong and is bad. And hopefully Israel will not allow that to happen, right? But the thought of this, by the way, is that right now in the world, every year, 2 to 3 million children will die of starvation. 2 to 3 million. The world is not worried about these different places where there is real famine. So, for example, Yemen, Sudan, they literally have mass starvation on they have a total collapse of infrastructure. They have no funding, no functioning government, and they are at a point where thousands of people are dying because of lack of food. Places like North Korea and Afghanistan, they face chronic hunger with virtually no international spotlight. And actually with North Korea, the West actually has a blockade on North Korea. Nothing in, nothing out, because they see North Korea as a threat. And so even though there are people there literally starving to death, the world doesn't seem to care because, well, North Korea is bad, obviously. That's what the mentality is. And every year, literally millions of children die, not because of a blockade, not because of, Israel's actions, but because of poverty, neglect, and basically the lack of political will to stop them from dying. And yet with Gaza, they do not have that same problem. No international body has actually declared that there's a famine in Gaza. There's no famine in Gaza, and that includes the UN. Aid continues to go into Gaza, even though there's been a 11-week pause on aid. Before that pause, in the 2 months that there was a ceasefire, the 6 weeks that there was a ceasefire, Israel delivered enough humanitarian aid to feed the population of Gaza for 8 months. So I just want to point that out to everyone. So during the 6 weeks ceasefire between January and March, 25,200 aid trucks were sent into Gaza via Israel, which was the equivalent of 447,000 tons of aid. According to the United Nations World Food Programme, this aid is enough to feed Gaza for the next 8 months. So that's according to the UN's own guidelines on how much food is needed per population. Yeah, so to nail this point down a bit further, in January and February, more aid was sent into Gaza than for the entire 7 months before that combined. So there hasn't been famine in 2024, even though there was a lot of talk about famine, possible famine, etc., etc. There wasn't famine. There was enough food on the shelves for people. Unfortunately, the problem isn't necessarily that, the problem isn't necessarily lack of aid inside of Gaza. It's a lack of that aid being able to get to the right people. Why is that? Because Hamas steals it. It's because people are exploiting that aid. So, for example, the free aid that is given by the world to Gaza is then taken by people and then sold. So there are some people who maybe can't afford the aid. There's obviously a lot of people who can't get it because Hamas has it. And by the way, there was a video the other, literally like 5 days ago, which I saw, which was of Hamas terrorists firing rocket-propelled grenades from inside a storage facility of a humanitarian aid. So obviously they're using this aid as a shield for attacking Israeli forces. And everything Hamas does is to try and, harm Gaza, harm the civilians, harm women and children in Gaza. The reason for it is to make Israel look bad. It is to trick the world into believing that Israel is this evil, and actually Hamas is doing everything in its power to destroy the people of Gaza, and Israel is doing everything in its power to destroy Hamas without destroying the people of Gaza. And it is just such a hard situation, a complex situation, which Israel's having to deal with. And the problem we've got is we've got a lot of politicians who are in, standing there in the Houses of Parliament, in the Commons, and they are speaking the lies of Hamas. They are literally hoodwinked by Hamas propaganda. And this was evident yesterday when there was a debate in Parliament where David Lammy was announcing these sanctions and the, ending trade talks and condemning Israel and so forth. All these things happened, and 4 different MPs referenced the 14,000 babies who are going to die in the next 2 days. And David Lammy's response to those showed that he believed that lie hook, line and sinker as well. So one of the times when he's asked by Dr. Danny Chambers, Liberal Democrats MP, he mentions the 14,000 babies may die in the next 48 hours, etc. And Lammy responds, it's really straightforward. So, what we ask is concrete action. It's really straightforward. It is that Netanyahu stops, that he halts his course of action. We're taking concrete action with our allies to try to bring this to an end. But the honourable gentleman knows that in the end, this is in the hands of the Israeli government. Holding up our hands and expressing disgust is not sufficient. I recognise that. But the Israeli government will be held to account if they do not act. So what I'm saying is, the lies of this UN, the head of the UN's humanitarian organization, spoke this blood libel. He was basically speaking as an activist without facts and information, but with just a bombastic statement where he had obviously misunderstood the 14,000 sort of claim. He then speaks that to the world. The BBC then pumps that out to the world. Our MPs are then saying it. Our government is then reacting and taking strong action against Israel based on lies and disinformation. And this is, it's the famous quote that Winston Churchill said, the lie is halfway around the world before the truth has his pants on. It's like this spreads like wildfire, and it spreads far more when it comes to Israel. And I think this is what's happening with the world, with the way the Bible says it. In the end times, the whole world will turn against Israel. I don't think we're at that point right now. I do think if Israel can, get control of this situation, if some ceasefire can be agreed and the war can end, I think there may be a period of respite before we get to a proper situation where, the entire world turns against Israel. But for me, it's just showing that this is how easy it is to manipulate the narrative. Ultimately, Satan is the father of lies. When these people are speaking these lies, they are speaking from Satan's heart, not from anyone else's, right? And so, from the heart, the mouth speaks. And so all of this, we need to bring it back to scripture, right? And so this reminds me of a scripture we've used many times here on the podcast, but Zechariah 12 verse 1 to 3, I think. And it says, this is Jerusalem's enemies to be destroyed. And it speaks, this is a prophecy, the word of the Lord concerning Israel. So the Lord who stretches out the heavens, who lays the foundations of the earth, and who forms the human spirit with a person, declares, I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that sends all the surrounding peoples reeling. Judah will be besieged as well as Jerusalem. So this is talking actually about the cup that sends the surrounding peoples reeling. In other versions, it says the cup of trembling. It says about the cup of drunkenness, and we see this in the areas around Israel. We look at the Palestinians, Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, the radical Islamist groups within the Palestinian territories. We see that within Hamas, within Hezbollah, within the Houthis, within Iran and so forth. It is a cup of drunkenness for the surrounding nations, and that's what's happening there. We see that Judah will be besieged as well as Jerusalem. Well, if you look at historical Judah, the two nations in biblical times, Israel and Judah, the almost entirety of Judah, which includes Jerusalem, is now what the world calls the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. And so that right now it's besieged. It is taken over by people who are not Israeli. And Jerusalem as well is even though it is the undisputed capital of Israel, it has divisions within it because obviously there isn't a temple there. There is, Islamic mosques to a god which is not the God of Israel on the Temple Mount. And so, it is besieged right now, even though it's a different besieging, I think. Maybe this isn't exactly, the besieging that happened. We did see that obviously before, between 1948 and 1967, when the Jordanians controlled it completely. It was besieged, and Israel had to recapture that territory and free Jerusalem from the grip of its enemies. But there still is a besiegement, if you see what I'm saying. Anyway, verse 3 of Zechariah 12 says, On that day, when all the nations of the earth are gathered against her, I will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all the nations. All who try to move it will injure themselves. So think about that. So this is talking about a time where Judah is besieged, Jerusalem as well. All the nations are against Israel, and God, this is God speaking, I will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all nations, not just a few nations, all of them. And I think this is what we're seeing all the time when we see different countries come in where they're trying to dictate to Israel what to do. They're taking actions which are damaging Israel's safety, they're damaging the Jewish people's safety, and they're going against what God wants to happen. And the final thing in all this that I want to highlight is that David Lammy suggested that the UK will be recognising a Palestinian state. And one of the aspects of a Palestinian state means that Jerusalem is divided, and that East Jerusalem is the capital of the Palestinian state, and West Jerusalem is the capital of the Jewish state, Israel, which obviously is unbiblical. And I think this is the thing, it's the immovable rock. And God says, any nation who tries to move it will injure themselves. This goes back to Genesis 12 verse 3. I'll bless those who bless you, I will curse those who curse you. God is saying, him, the Lord God Almighty, he will bless, he will curse. It's a promise of God, and this is deeply troubling because in June, it looks like the UK will be recognising a Palestinian state alongside France, Canada, and maybe some other countries at a UN meeting that is taking place. Now, that's not 100% guaranteed, but David Lammy was suggesting it, and I wouldn't be surprised because of their background and their history and their anti-Israel nature of them. There is likely a strong movement within Labour that wants to push for a Palestinian state, Palestinian recognition. It's in their manifesto, and under Jeremy Corbyn, under his manifesto, it was saying that they would immediately recognise a Palestinian state. Thankfully, Jeremy Corbyn lost that election and wasn't elected. But in the new manifesto they made, they took out the immediacy of it, but they instead referred to it as an inalienable right of the Palestinian people to have a state. And when you think about this, this is coming from a left-wing, a centre-left organisation, but there is a lot of far-left people within Labour, unfortunately. And they will say about Israel, oh, Israel doesn't have a right to exist. No state has a right to exist. But then in their manifesto, they say the Palestinians have an inalienable right to a Palestinian state. So they contradict themselves because ultimately the way they are operating is against the things of God, because they are going against the Bible. The Bible says you can only serve one of two masters on this earth. You're either serving God or you're serving Satan. And if you're not serving God, if you're not submitting to his authority, then sadly you're inadvertently submitting to Satan's authority. And, that's the sad reality of it. And so that's one of the scriptures. Another scripture is Joel 3 verse 2, which is another one we use all the time. And that's, again, God saying, I will gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. There I will put them on trial for what they did to my inheritance, my people Israel, because they scattered my people among the nations and divided up my land. So this is obviously talking again about an end time event which will take place where all the nations will be gathered against Israel and they will be judged by God. And this is specifically, it's not about how, it's not talking about salvation or anything like this. It's not talking about their relationship with God. It's literally talking about how they scattered God's people and divided his land. He doesn't say it's Israel's land, he says his land. And obviously we know from the Bible that God said, I give this land to you as an inheritance, but ultimately it's God's land, and this is the thing. There are so many governments out here who are, many men who are basically acting as if they have a higher authority than God because they do not fear the Lord. They do not have understanding and wisdom of the things of God. Whereas we as Christians, we understand that, when God decrees something, we are fools to go against it. The fear of the Lord is our strength. And so, I think that sort of rounds up everything I want to say on the podcast today. But I think, we have to be very aware that this is a spiritual battle that Israel is in. The lies of the enemy are, they are based from Satan himself. It is a spiritual battle that is trying to undermine Israel. The reason the nations are going to be turning against Israel is because they are going to be hoodwinked by the devil. They are believing the lies of Satan. They're turning against God. And so we as Christians, we understand that we Christians too, we are part of God's people. Christians and Jews, we are God's people, and we need to stand together. As Christians, we need to be praying for Israel. We need to be speaking the truth about Israel. We need to be standing up for God and for his word, because it is God himself who chose that land for the Jewish people. And it's a tough thing to do. There are people out there who are, vengeful and full of hate, and they hate God. They hate the people of God. They hate us, and we need to stand up and be strong. We need to be like Yuval was at Eurovision. I know Eurovision is such a minor thing in the grand scheme of things when we look at these things, but she stood up there on the world stage and she, received hatred. She received, threats against her, and yet she stood up and represented her people and her country, just as, during, October 7th, when she was lying under those bodies, she understood the anti-Semitic hatred that was against her. She understood that the people against her were, willing to go to the extent of murdering, over 1,000 people in the largest mass slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. This is the evil that we're up against. And unfortunately, that same evil that was there on October 7th, it is there within Hamas. It is there, unfortunately, on British streets, as we saw 500,000 people, allegedly 500,000 people walking through London just last weekend, where they were showing support for the Palestinians. Unfortunately, they are showing support largely for Hamas, and the amount of anti-Semitism in the signs that were there. You know, it is on the streets, and we have a government who is weak against anti-Semitism on the streets of Britain, weak against anti-Semitism that is trying to destroy Israel. It's strong against, British people who are standing up for British values. It's strong against Israel who's standing up for the Jewish people. You know, our government is in a situation right now where it needs to change because it's not doing anything. Not anything, but it's going against God, right? It's doing unrighteous, ungodly things, which we need to stand up against. We need to pray for our government. We do need to pray for our leaders, even though it is hard sometimes, especially when they're doing things which, quite frankly, as someone who loves Israel, like it frustrates me strongly when I have to listen to these people who are leading my country, who are meant to be looking out for my good, and actually they're going completely against God. It's hard to then pray for those people, but you know, we have to pray for them. We have to pray for our leaders. We have to pray for President Trump, who, I didn't even have time to speak about his trips to the Middle East last week. You know, there's a lot of things we have to pray about because that's our role as watchmen. We're not on the front lines fighting a battle. We're in the spiritual battle. We have to be on our knees in prayer, fighting this spiritual war. And I hope this podcast has helped to shine a light on certain things. I hope it has helped to encourage you a little bit. And I also want to sort of ask you to help support CUFI, because we are a small team here at CUFI. We would love to do more. We'd love to do more videos, love to put more information out there and speak the truth, but we need your support. So if you would like to become a partner with Christians United for Israel, please do go to www.cufi.org.uk/donate, and you can make a donation. And if you want to get involved in our campaigns, go to cufi.org.uk/campaigns. Our latest campaign is Justice Not Jihad, so it's cufi.org.uk/justice not jihad. And that is a campaign which is urging the British government to hold firm in its banning of Hamas, to uphold the law, and to prosecute people who support Hamas in this country. And we have had thousands of people sign that petition, and we are hoping to get thousands more, because our government needs to get the message. It needs to hear from us, because, you know, if we're not going to speak, no one else is going to. And we need to tell them exactly what we think, and we need to correct them, to change their course. And I believe through prayer and through especially the body of Christ coming together and standing with Israel, I do believe that we can change our nation and turn it away from the evil that it is headed towards. So we need to be prayerful. We need to be bold, to stand up, to take action, to sign these campaigns and to lobby the government. And we need to stand with the Jewish community, because more and more they are feeling isolated and alone. And even in this country, I mean, just imagine the Jewish people. They've suffered record levels of anti-Semitism. Their nation has been, attacked by 7 different military forces. And now the government is seeming to abandon them when they need them the most. So, we do have to stand up for the Jewish people, because, they really need it right now. So I think that's all for today. We need to be praying about the situation, and I hope you can support the work we're doing here. So yeah, thank you very much, and I'll see you next time with Alistair.